Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this week's Open Source Workplace podcast. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Steve Todd. I am the host. I'm the founder of OpenSourceWorkplace.com and also the global head of workplace at NASDAQ. I appreciate you spending time with us this morning, and we have a very special guest, deep thinker. A lot of people know it. He is one of the top influencers in corporate real estate. So I'm really looking forward to digging into a deep conversation with our guest. So what are we going to talk about? I'm going to pull up today's agenda. So I'm going to speak with Vik Bangia. Vik is corporate real estate strategy expert, an author, keynote speaker, future of work evangelist. Big title. I'd love to dig in to find out what that actually means. And then Vik is also the CEO of Verum Consulting and Outsourced USA. And, you know, we sort of look through the lens of today of what the world looks like, what questions companies are actually looking at, what people are thinking about, and we put those questions to industry leaders and thought experts. And we're going to talk today about war of talent. What is that war of talent? What does that mean? And is the balance of power shifting to employees when people think about war of talent and actually how people are going to attract and retain talent in the future? And also, what can employees do about this? Is there opportunities and strategies that they can deploy? And these are things that I'm going to speak with Vik about today. So before we move further on, let's welcome in Vik. Vik, welcome. Welcome to Open Source Workplace.
Steve, thanks for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. I know we've tried to do this for a while now. Our schedules just didn't align, but I'm really happy to be here this morning.
No, thank you for being here. And to your point, right, we've been trying to schedule this, and I think actually it's almost worked out perfectly if we think about the subject, if we think about how I came to know you and where you came into my life in a sense of some of the content that you've been sharing, and this point of time when we've decided to pick this topic. You know, we scheduled this meeting, and then we basically just fell into this topic. So before we get into that, though, look, what should the audience know about you?
Well, my main business is in helping companies outsource their real estate. I spend a lot of time working with corporate clients in setting up outsourcing relationships with large service providers. But most recently, I moved into more of the strategy and operations work as it relates to the future of the workplace, including what you mentioned, OutsourceUSA, which is a network that I've had as long as I've had Verum Consulting. But we're focused on the future of the workplace and the fact that the workplace is becoming more and more employee-centric. So OutsourceUSA.com is where you can see a list of the companies that are part of that network.
Fantastic.
And that's been keeping me very busy over the last several weeks and months.
I'm sure that's only going to get busier. So we have put links where people can reach out to you, Vik, and obviously go visit your website and learn a lot more about you. And one of the key things I said to you beforehand, it's great seeing you in color, because everywhere I go, you're always in black and white, and you look devilishly handsome. Don't get me wrong, but it's good to see you in color, man. So I mean, tell us a few fun facts about you. Obviously, you're well known in the industry. You provide lots of guidance to a lot of companies. What other things do people should know about you outside? How do you relax? Like, what do you do to sort of recuperate and recover?
Well, so I do play guitar. That's my main hobby. I spend a lot of time playing guitar. I throw out a lot of my musical experiments out on YouTube. I'm the cornet chapter here locally. You know, we have a little band that's played together every year on our annual boat trip. Unfortunately, we missed last year because of the pandemic, and hopefully we'll be on the boat this year to provide some entertainment. I'm also an amateur photographer. I love photography. It used to accompany all of my international travel. And so I've got great pictures of landscapes and architecture all over the world. But again, because of the pandemic, that's been pushed off to the side. So those are my hobbies and really the way I relax. But my main relaxation so far this spring has been a fairly large landscaping project I'm doing out in the front yard.
Nice, very good. Well done, you. Well done, you. So as we sort of flow into this, I did want to pull up a quote that sort of was taken from an article you published in July, and you actually shared an excerpt of the conversation I had with our good friend Mike Petresky last July on your article. And I'm going to pull up the slide, and it's going to go, employees fear both rational and irrational will be evident upon returning to the workplace. Now, you wrote this in 2019 or 2020, and
Yeah.
And this was through the lens of when organizations really were, there's a lot of media, a lot of content out there telling companies what it is, what different companies were doing. And your message was quite simple. It was look at your own self, look at your inner, what your organization is, what your organization needs to do, your employees, your businesses, and so on and so forth. Has your position changed? Has your thought changed? Has your guidance changed since then?
I think this is a very interesting quote. And I remember when you and Mike were talking about that article I wrote called Workplace 2021, Get Ahead of the New Normal. And what I saw happening there was that there was a disconnect between what employers were saying and what employees were feeling. Obviously, through the beginning part of the pandemic, people were a little disaffected, didn't know what to do. But then there was political polarization. There was all sorts of media, machinations about the pandemic and a lot of fear. And what I saw happening was that people had some rational fears about going back into the workplace, but then some of them were irrational as well. And they included things like, confirmation bias and emotional reactions to things that their employers were saying about coming back into the workplace. I think it's still true. I think that people still have a set of irrational fears. I think when we go back to the workplace, we're not going to be the same as we were before the pandemic. And I think employers need to be very careful that they handle their employees with empathy and compassion as they go into the workplace, because people have changed. They've been through what I sort of referred to in that article as a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. They're not the same. They have anxieties and fears and concerns, and they need to be given an understanding from their employers that their employers are worried about their safety as well as their emotional well-being and mental health. And as long as the employer can do that, those fears will be allayed. If not, you may see some additional irrational behavior and emotional reactions as people return to work.
Yeah, and it sort of falls nicely into the conversation that sort of prompted the title for this podcast. And where this came from was, I did over 200 interviews in 2020, and I basically did an article around 50 workplace lessons that all those experts give to the channel, and it synthesized and summarized those. And this was a conclusion: employees must recognize their needs and responsibilities as an individual. Then they can branch out the needs of the community. Organizations must put a premium on making sure that their employees are productive and happy. Gone are the days when employees can tolerate problems and neglect their well-being. If there's anything the pandemic has taught us, we've taken care of ourselves. And after that, we've done so we can take care of others and also our responsibilities. Ultimately, this is how we can all thrive. Now, you responded to this posting with this title, "The Balance of Power is Shifting to the Employee." What gives you this sense of that balance is shifting?
Well, a couple reasons. So I do talk with a lot of employees, and that's really where I do my research. There's research, but then there's the actual on the ground conversations that you as a consultant I have the ability to have with my clients and their employees. And what I'm hearing from them is that over the period of the time that they've been away from the office, they've in some ways rediscovered themselves. They've found that they have they needed to, and they actually affected a level of self-care and care for their family, and really reconnected with themselves. And because of that, going back to the office and being sort of disconnected from those things is a form of anxiety for them. And they're also sensing that, they can demand that a little bit more of their employer to say, look, I need to have a work-life balance. I know now what real work-life balance is. Real work-life balance isn't weekends off and casual Fridays. That's what work-life balance was before. I think now work-life balance means you can take care of your family, you can take care of yourself, you can do the things you enjoy, and you can have a productive a career and work life as well. And as people come to realize that more and more, the sense is that the balance of power is shifting to the employee. If the employers are not going to provide that level of need for the employee, then there are choices that the employee has to move to another company or to make bigger demands of their employer to provide those services like emotional well-being and mental health services, like amenities for home offices, things like that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when we think about the employee, right? The employee's perspective, I think, has shifted during the pandemic to all the points you mentioned, right? And I think each employee is probably going to make a trade-off decision. If I go to the office, that may mean I don't get to have breakfast with my family, have lunch with my spouse, have put the kids to bed, all those different things. And there's a trade-off that employees have to make is, okay, if I go to the office, I know what I can do at home. If I go to the office, I have to give these things up. And those are things that the office now has to provide value to attract and retain. Almost like, as a company, the office has to become that attraction and retention strategy.
Yeah, and the office has to be a meaningful trip, right? So if I can do what I need to do from home, I'll stay home to do it. But if there is a need to be in the office and the office is providing me a meaningful value and reason to make the 25-mile commute downtown, to deal with traffic, to go up in elevators with in a multi-story building with other people, to put myself at potential risk for exposure to COVID or really anything that is a result of leaving the house and taking an overall risk, then if there is a meaningful reason to do that, I'll do that. So there's going to be kind of that decision made, and it may be made on a more frequent basis than just having, hey, you have to be in the office 2 days a week. I think it'll be, you have to be in the office when it makes sense to be in the office, and you can work from home when it makes sense to work from home, as long as you can judiciously, understand when to make that decision.
Right. And, we sort of set this up, and then overnight, another piece of content comes out from Microsoft. And absolutely, I was astounded by some of these statistics when we talk about war for talent. Right, there is a real war for talent. There's what's published, and then there's the things that that's happened within organizations that because you're having those conversations. There's things that I'm hearing in the conversations that I'm having. I mean, I know organizations that are accelerated their merit and promotion strategies to keep talent. Right, so there is a real war, and then here are some of the statistics that sort of were just published. I don't know what jumped out at you when you first saw this, Vik.
Well, when I read that article, I think the thing that struck me the most was this acknowledgement of digital exhaustion. Because again, when it goes back to sort of the employee-centric workforce of the future, as well as the balance of power shifting, it's due to the fact that there is this level of digital exhaustion. We've all been through this for a year. We go through it every day, multiple Zoom calls, but still not a real live social interaction. The other thing was that this 40% of the global workforce is likely going to leave their current employer within the next year. That means employers have to come up with ways to retain their workforce. How are they going to retain their workforce? They're going to retain their workforce by providing amenities, as well as you mentioned, career path development, other things that they're going to be forced to provide as that balance of power shifts. I think the article also talked about the leaders being out of touch. And, that led me to remember an article I just read about HSBC and, and of course you have to read multiple versions of that article. One makes it sound like the leaders are completely out of touch. The other ones make it sound like the leaders are consensus based and making decisions about hot desking their senior leadership in a more collaborative fashion. But whatever that message is, the employees are hearing it two different ways. One is, this is command and control. I'm going to be being told what to do. Or the other one says, hey, my employer is actually looking out for my well-being as well as the well-being of everybody in the company. And we are going to make these decisions together. But then the last thing I think was that there was a need for genuine interactions. These Zoom interactions are fine, but I think people really need to feel the emotional connection to their coworkers and their leadership. And that's something that, we haven't done as a society in the workplace. So that's going to be something brand new.
Yeah, it is. And we just got a question come through it just on this very topic from our good friend Mike Petresky. Should workplace leaders try to encourage the return to office or just let things play out naturally?
My personal view is that they should encourage it, but they should encourage it with a level of empathy and compassion by saying, we are uh, focused on making sure that the workplace environment is going to be safe, productive, and healthy. And as long as you can do that, and this is what I do with clients now, I'm reading their reopening strategies and helping them guiding them through making sure that their reopening strategies do address people's emotional health and well-being, and that the tone of the reopening plan is one that makes the employee feel really good about their employer. So I think they should encourage it, but they have to do it in a way that makes employees feel comforted, safe, and looked after.
So when you say encourage, what does encourage mean? Does that mean, welcoming, hosting social gatherings? Does that mean saying you got to be in the office 2 days per week as just as examples? What do you mean by encourage?
Well, encourage means we want your input and feedback to our plan. In other words, not a us versus them type of situation where, here's what we're doing and it's all about what we've decided to do for you. That's different than saying, here's what we are thinking. We'd like your input as we develop this plan together, because we want to encourage you to come back to the office and we want it to feel like something where you feel, again, looked after and part of the solution. I think that bridge needs to be built. And again, as I read some of these reopening plans, they do sound very technical. They're focused on physical safety. They don't have a lot to do with psychological safety, which is where I'm going back to my clients and saying, hey, here's 10 different things that this particular plan is missing. And let's address each one of those to make sure that your plan, when it's read by the employees, they get it and they feel good about it.
So what are some of the common things that you see are missed in that plan?
Well, again, resources for emotional and mental health and well-being. Again, some of the people that I mentioned in my OutsourceUSA network focus a lot on coaching leaders. Other folks are focused on a volatile and uncertain environment and trying to create a level of comfort and collaboration around that. So, again, with that team and with some of the things that I do, we can highlight all of those areas that are gaps. But all of it comes down to being more on the human side, not necessarily just the cleaning and the safety and the physical security. That's all being covered fairly well in these facility reopening plans. I think the facility managers and even the service providers that provide facility services are doing a good job of making sure that the entry level kiosks are there for hand sanitizing and tracking and sensing. All of the technologies are there. What's missing is the human side, the human element.
So last week, I interviewed Chris Kane, and we dug into a great conversation. And one thing he resonated with me. Yep, you got it. I've got it. It's a great book. And he actually said that we're in an era of choice.
Yeah.
Choice being, the employee has a choice, the employer has a choice. How do the two come together? Now, I know you've spoken about, it needs to be a conversation, but how do both parties get to what is their optimal level for the organization? Because make no mistake, right? Leadership's, everyone within an organization's ultimate goal is to, improve the organization, be it shareholder value, be it the mission, be it the vision, whatever that is. So how do they best get to that point, knowing that we're in an era of choice?
Well, it is going to be a big wake-up call for a lot of employers. The fact is that not only is it the major employers that exist today, but this pandemic has actually created a lot of smaller businesses and smaller entities that are now seeing the opportunity to say, hey, if we can go, and I use this word, but steal employees from other employers, we can get their talent to come over here because we can provide them the exact things that they're sort of missing when it comes to employee retention and recruitment. And those things are as simple as, hey, you know what, you come work for us, we will set you up with a home office, because we know that a lot of people don't have the ability to work from home other than to sit at a card table in their living room. They don't have an office, they don't have a desk, they don't have an ergonomically correct chair. We're going to give you all of those things, and and provide them in a way that is connected to the employee, not just something that's sort of passive or flippant, like, hey, you know what, we'll just throw you this bone and that'll make you happy.
So to pull on that a little bit, so you posted that we were going to be chatting about this on LinkedIn, and this is a response that we got, and I just highlighted this one thing, and you just touched on it, right? Source good remote work, build environment options, and not just throw a stipend. This resonated with me. I know it resonated with you. Why did this resonate with you?
Well, this was a comment. Yeah, there was a LinkedIn conversation, and Jeannie made this comment that I said, wow, that line right there is exactly right, because this idea of just throwing a stipend at employees or throwing them, some training or whatever, that's kind of been the behavior of employers for a long, long time. And again, as I talk about the balance of power shifting, it's exactly this type of behavior where employers just say, you know what, we're going to sort of soothe the savages by giving them something to keep them calm, as opposed to really making that connection on a human level of, with empathy and compassion. This used to be the way they used to do that. Say, you know what, we'll just give you $1,000, you go figure it out, you're on your own. I think it's got to be a little bit more intentional than just throwing a stipend at somebody or just, offering them training. It's got to be meaningful to them, and it's got to be directly applicable to them. And so if I'm going to work for a new employer and the employer's value proposition is, hey, you come work for us, we're going to send somebody over to your home, somebody like Jeannie, who can provide you an ergonomically correct setup for your home office so that you don't have back problems or later file a workers' compensation claim, or in other ways, be angry at the company for not looking after your physical health as well. That's important. And that's going to be a differentiator. And that's where I think a lot of employers are going to have to, understand that's what's changing. That's what's shifting. And it can affect their ability to retain employees.
And like every coin, there's two sides to it, right? So we've talked a lot about what the employer needs to do, right? Let's look at it from an employee perspective, because the employee has a responsibility here too, right? The employee who wants to work from home, what sort of responsibilities do you think they owe to the organization? And I use the word owe because in essence, when you're employed by someone, you have a responsibility to deliver for that organization.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, it's just having a very clear set of expectations for what your job is and what it entails and what the performance measurement criteria is going to be. I think as long as everybody has a level of understanding of what's important to them and can execute on that, there's a lot of balance that's created there. The second one is communicating. And this is a two-way street, obviously, but employers need to make sure that they give the employees an opportunity to communicate their challenges, concerns, desires, and then employees need to be able to step up and do that in a very safe environment, in a safe environment, which is really important, because if somebody comes to me and asks me something and my employer asks me something, if I am operating with some anxiety, I may say, everything's fine, I don't need anything, when I actually do. But if you give employees a safe place to state their concerns, and some of the things that I do in my consulting practice allows for that, then they can actually state their actual concerns, and those can be delivered to their employer, so those things can be addressed. And believe me, as I talk to employees, they do have a lot of things that they tell me that they won't tell their employer. There is still a level of, gosh, if I say something or make a fuss, I'm going to either lose my job, or I'm going to be looked at differently, or I'm already outside the company. So, what's to say all of a sudden I disappear, that the company says, well, we can just make that change, and, we don't need that person working for us anymore. So there's a level of anxiety that still exists.
So Vic, what do employees tell you that they won't tell the companies then?
Well, a lot of it is they're feeling that their employer doesn't necessarily appreciate the obligations that they have outside of work, and just, or their boss in particular. Sometimes it's just one person, has a level of expectation that is actually increased through the pandemic rather than decrease, because there's a lot of bosses who don't do well when their employees aren't within arm's length. And it takes the right type of leader to be able to manage a remote workforce. It takes the right type of leader to understand what leading a remote workforce looks like. Some managers have never had to do that, and now they do. And that's why sometimes it's really important to bring in some like an executive coach or a leader who can help leaders, understand how to work with a remote workforce. I've always managed a remote workforce in my last, before I started my consulting practice. In my corporate jobs, I always managed a team that was located all around the country. So for me, it's not, anything difficult. But I had a boss at one point in my career who had a real challenge with me being in Southern California and him being in Northern California, where he didn't have the ability to walk down the hall and see me every day. It was, for him, a real challenge. And it is a real challenge for some leaders today.
Yeah, it is. And you've touched on it a few times, psychological safety. So I just want to pull something up. This is what you sent to me as your definition of psychological safety. And, we think the office environment provides this, right? Because we go into the office, we know what to expect. It's the same. We know who the people are. We're with people who are all in the same team, marching towards the same goal. Is psychological safety more challenging to manage remote workers?
Well, yeah, it's challenging because it's hard to understand what those words are: safe, open, respectful environment when you're not in that environment. And I use these discovery cards in my practice, which allow people to say things and communicate in a safe, anonymous manner, one that allows for open communication. But sometimes you need that interim step to make sure that you're being heard, and that whatever is communicated gets addressed by the employer or by the leader in the company. So psychological safety is making sure that environment exists so that nobody feels apprehensive in stating what their concerns are, and that when they do, it's returned back to the employee with action and communication, and in a very transparent way. And that sometimes still doesn't exist within the corporate environment.
So we did start with the balance of power is shifting to the employee. Do you think it will continue to shift and shift and shift more and more towards the employee? Or do you think that this is just a stepping stone, or this is just a moment in time? What do you think the long-term thing is?
Well, just like anything else, today you have words that describe a particular situation, but that then becomes the new reality. And once it becomes the new reality, there's no label anymore. I look at things like, LEED, which is still a label, but every brand new building is going to be built to those standards. It's not a thing as much anymore as it was before buildings were built this way. When the future workplace environment becomes one where people are physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually cared for all the way through their whole person in the workplace, then that becomes the new reality. And in fact, that's kind of how I'm positioning everything I do going forward in the workplace of the future. I think you mentioned workplace of the future, Evangelist. What I'm trying to do is say that that's what the future of work has to look like. Once we get there, the future of work is work. It's no longer the future of work. The label goes away. And so I see the balance of power as being a label today, but at some point that balance is going to come to a homeostasis and a true balance. It's no longer a discussion point.
I love that, the mindfulness, the spirituality of how all that unfolds. I think that's something we have to sort of really deeply understand, and I think it's the emotional connection that I think employees have with their job, with their lives, and how we manage those things going forward. So as we sort of wrap up, the time has absolutely flown by. I didn't realize that we were already over the 30 minutes, so it's just gone by, and I had so much more questions and more slides and everything else to share with folks. But before we wrap up, so what are the final thoughts that you want to leave today?
Well, it's this. One is make sure that your employees are being heard if you're an employer. make sure that your return to work strategies are addressing physical as well as psychological safety. And if there's any gaps, I'm happy to help anybody who wants to kind of discuss that. You can link in with me, or you can contact me directly. I write a lot of content on LinkedIn, so I like to say I like to have the pet phrase that is, I'm gladly going to give away all of my ingredients, just not my recipe. So you can go out there and find all the ingredients that you need to do whatever you'd like to do in corporate real estate and strategy out on my LinkedIn page or on my website. But when you want somebody to help you cook, give me a call. I'm the one with the recipe. But no, my goal is my goal for this conversation and my message to everybody is, don't ignore your employees. They are the key for the future of work, and everything is going to move to being more employee centric. That balance of power is shifting, but employers need to figure out how to put that in balance as quickly as possible. And there's several ways that they can do that. Employees need to make sure they're communicating their needs to their employers. And the sooner we can do that, and the sooner that we can get past this pandemic, the sooner we can get to a real healthy future of work.
Fantastic, fantastic. I can't say any more. I think you just summed it up there beautifully. And look, folks, thank you for joining Mr. Mike Petresky for sitting all the way through and enduring our conversation. We appreciate it. But
Thanks, Mike.
Look, thanks everybody. Look, as I said, links below. Go connect with Vik, read up what he's doing, listen to him, follow him, and he always provides thought-provoking insights. Take those insights, mull over them, give yourself some thinking time. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for your organization? And then go and apply that yourself. So look, thank you everybody. Appreciate your time this morning. We'll chat next week. All right, cheers. Thank you, Vik. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.